Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kate Galantich, and on behalf of Carasoft Technology, I would like to welcome you to our webinar, Empowering Citizens with Unparalleled Experience. So with that, I would like to hand off our presentation to Tom, our first speaker of the day.
Perfect. Thanks, Kate. So let me get this pulled up and we'll do a quick intro and get kicked off. So welcome, everyone. Thanks for watching here live as well as on demand later on. We're glad to be here and thank you for taking the time. We'll do a quick round of intros here. Tony, would you like to start, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate everybody's time today. My name is Tony Colombo. I'm with Global Technology Solutions, also known as GTS. We're a premier partner of Genesis, and specifically in the public sector. I'm a practice leader for our Genesis solutions within Global Technology Solutions.
Perfect. Thanks, Tony. My name is Tom Yang. I'm with Genesis. I'm a senior director over our Genesis digital business focused on public sector. So good to meet everyone virtually. Steve?
Afternoon. My name is Stephen Boberski, also with Genesis. My role is business development for all the public sector for Genesis, and I'm happy to be here.
All right, thanks. We have a pretty easy agenda today, and we'll focus most of our discussion on conversation. We'll have some visuals to tee up here, but we'll focus really on just looking at what is empathetic customer experience, what makes it up, how do you approach it, and especially in light of the mandate around customer experience, what that means. And then we'll look at some of the what we call systems of success, and specifically around change and change management. So with that, I think let's dive right in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, Tom, here, this is where we want to go ahead and kick this off. And as moderator, I think some of the things that we're looking at is really as a public entity, how we might be able to service, constituents or customer based upon their initiatives and their wants and needs. So perhaps you can share with us, what within the public sector space and the focus of that nowadays, right? Specifically at the government level and also at the state level. What is customer experience and how one might start to modernize their existing experience, right?
Yeah, sure thing. And I think, part of the reason that we had this webinar really too is the fact that it's an interesting topic in that customer experience has been around for decades and decades. And I think there's oftentimes a question in public sector of what does that mean for agencies? What does that mean for meeting and exceeding missions? I think, tactically what we saw and what we mentioned earlier was the White House executive order that was recently published a few months ago around customer experience. It's interesting to note over the last number of administrations, they've all had customer experience mandates and White House orders, and if not, right? And that is a singular focus on what I think is really the right thing is we have to look at, in this case, the public experience, the constituent experience, whatever you want to call it, in order to really meet and exceed the goals of each agency. We can no longer say, I'm going to be able to do my mission without caring about what the end customer, the end public, the end constituent really experiences. Right now, I think, Tony, to your question, and this is where we'll kind of keep it conversational here first, but I would say a lot of where we see success and where we see agencies having success is in expanding their view to say, not only am I going to look at the tactical operational thing of what it means for what my agency does. And we'll use some examples, not calling out any particular agencies or whatnot here, but just as examples. But we talk about HHS, Health and Human Services, phenomenal need, phenomenal things that they can deliver, but it has to be, we have to look beyond just the benefits and services and such that we deliver, right? SNAP and TANF, those are tactical things. Those are tactical things that somebody gets, but surrounding them is the entire context. Why are they there? How are they there? What has their journey been? And we have to actually look at all of that in order to serve them best, right? I mean, this is like having a conversation, trying to get to know somebody and simply saying, what's your job? Where do you live? And those two things are supposed to define them. That's not the case. That's not who they are, right? And so even as agencies, and this is both public sector, but even commercial, right? Organizations are starting to see there's a lot of value in looking at the entire context of folks. I'll take a pause there. Steve, what would you add?
You're 100% correct. You mentioned the mandate, and even more recently, it's now funded. There's $100 million out there for the government agencies to go out there and help transform, right? And the key here is transformation, just like you said, expanding the view, expanding the vision. A lot of the agencies have almost every agency I've talked to has always been trying to make the customer experience better. But what that means and what that entails has sort of changed in the last few years, right? Because the empathy side of things that we talk about all the time is really starting to hit home on many levels. It's about not just the experience of the customer on the other end, but also about the experience of the agent on this end, which makes it better on the far end, right? So COVID changed a lot of things. It was a bad time for a lot of folks. But what it did do is bring telework into play. Now, what you have is some new dynamics. You've got more people available to work. You've got people in locations that perhaps historically couldn't work there before. So it changed the demographic of who's available to work for an agency and therefore maybe relate better to their constituents. And then also just shift availability and then availability to the public, right? So that was a big change. But that came with a lot of challenges, right? So as they look to how do I get what I have today to work when they're sitting somewhere else, challenge number one, they start to have discussions about with this new environment, how can I transform, not just move it, but transform what I'm doing. And empathy has been the key to that, right? Because if I want to work on retention, if I want to make the experience better, it's so much better if I have been, let's talk about journey mapping. If I've been to a website and I'm trying to renew a driver's license or maybe order anything, maybe renew my passport, and I'm having trouble. If I see that if that's tracked, and then as a user, I say, yes, I'd like some help. I call into the contact center. The agent knows that I've already tried to do that. It's not, hi, hello, how are you? How can I help you? Have you tried to do this? And what can I do today? It's, oh, I see you've been to the website. I understand you tried to do this. How can I help? Perhaps you'd like to try this. Now the person who's calling in is happy because you know what they want you, and the agent's happier because they're not playing 20 questions, right? It's not the acquisition. That's just a concentric spiral of quality all the way across the board. So you're being more empathetic, it improves the experience, and you know, now the government, they're paying attention and relating to me, and it's a much better experience across the board. So we're seeing this as part of the transformation, but we have to help them on how to get there, right? So everybody knows why, now it's how, and that's where the discovery part takes it.
And you know, Steve, just kind of off of that, a couple things that come to mind. One is, I think something that you touched on is what I kind of would articulate as almost a little bit of a shift from a quantitative mindset of running things to a qualitative mindset. Quantitative, what I mean by that is when we have measures like average handle time, let's say contact center, right? Average handle time, the length of an engagement, or the number of calls that somebody can take in a day, or the number of chats. Those are good measures, but they're quantitative by nature. They purely measure how many did you do? How long was the call? And the importance of qualitative can't be understated, because that's where we see as organizations start to focus on that, they unlock the whole next level of customer experience in the sense, okay, let me look at the numbers, but let me also look at the quality. What was the customer satisfaction? What was the friction? What was the dwell time, right? These are the kinds of things that give us that other layer of insight. I think coming back to what you said there, Steve, is when we talk about the public, and again, it's very gray, which is a good thing, between public sector and commercial, because the experiences are overlapping in some sense, right? If you're a public sector agency, you have seen this firsthand. Your constituents are asking you to deliver the same, if not better, experiences that leading commercial and retail organizations are delivering, right? That's the expectation. And I think, you know, part of that is as we start to move to qualitative, we can understand better what are their needs, what are their wants, you know, and serve them more. And then I think the second point I would say is it also can sound overwhelming when, and we've seen these shifts in demographics and demands and channels and everything over the last 10, 15, 20 years, it can seem overwhelming to say, how in the world do I deploy all of that? How in the world do I support all of that? And I think one of the things I say to people is, it doesn't have to be all you as the organization or as the agency. It's also on your customers. They're happy to, I call it, co-create these experiences for you. You just have to provide the foundation. You have to provide the opportunity. I think, Steve, like the scenario that you mentioned is a perfect example of that, where people will choose what is best for me, what is easy for me. And if it's self-service, right? Deflection is not a bad word. It's only bad if you do it for the wrong reasons.
That's
Deflection
right.
is good when it gets them an answer immediately. More people that these days will prefer self-service resolutions than assisted service if they can get their answer within 5, 10, 15 seconds than calling in and waiting on hold. But it's why you do it and how you do it and the approach, right? That's kind of important. Again, it comes back to understanding, where are they? Who are they? Where are they at? You know, what's their journey?
Well, you know, just to touch on one other thing, you know, those metrics that everybody looks at traditionally, right? Call volume, call wait time, handling time, abandon rate, all laudable things to track. But what you will find, what we are finding repeatedly and without exception, if you focus on the qualitative, the numbers fix themselves. My call handling time is down because I don't have to spend so much time discovering what they need. They're happier. They're not spending as much time in queue or on the call or waiting or trying to solve a problem. I'm not, as an agent, spending so much time looking for things because it's presented to me on a screen. So if you focus on the quality, the quantity goes with it. It's sort of a concentric, but those metrics go with it, and that's what we find. We want to improve the experience. We'll help you, and that journey it doesn't have to be as complex, right? You can take a holistic approach, and there's almost two sort of opposing views right now, which is this is so complex I could never install it, or if I just buy the right toys, it'll fix everything. Well, obviously, neither of those things are true, right? But there's a happy medium, and with the funding that's out there now, and a little bit of discovery and help from Tony and GTS and Genesis, we can help you do that discovery and start that path.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think something to add there, you guys, and it's a good point. And what customers might be asking is where to start, right? And not necessarily, it does not have to be a big bang approach, right? So where the concepts of these modern technologies and are delivered through cloud solutions, right? That's just the delivery model for them. So in the effort to keep some of those small, if there's some objectives that are really needed and you identify, repetitive tasks that need to be uplifted and moved into some sort of automation, there's the opportunity to be able to do some of that and start migrating those over slowly, or at least have a target for those. And it doesn't have to be a full-blown 9-month, 10 months, or up to a year project in order to do so, right? There's an opportunity for some quick wins and the ability to be able to collect that data as well as manipulate that experience for that customer. And as you do that migration into that next experience or that modern solution, that offers you the opportunity for flexibility as well as training and things like that to get folks up to speed in order to do that. So basically recapping that, it doesn't have to be a large full-blown project in order to get started, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think, what I can safely say fans of is almost as it were kind of legging technology and capabilities into each other so that they're building upon each other, right? For example, let's get tactical and specific here. Oftentimes, when we work with organizations, the first step will be, hey, before you do anything, do you have a grasp on what your volumes are? Do you have a grasp on what it is people are asking you for? Half the time the answer is no. Well, if you don't have a grasp, we're not going to jump into doing anything. We're going to help you understand, right? And let's take a website, for example. Every agency has a website. For most, that's the predominant way that the public and constituents find information, right? And the first question I ask is, out of X number of people, let's say it's 500,000 people a month. Out of 500,000 people a month that come to your website, can you tell how many got the answers they need? Can you tell where they went? Again, that's part of that listening, right? If you're jumping in and saying, I'm going to throw XYZ on there, and to Steve's point, just buy something, not going to work. Not going to get you the impact that you're looking for. And so, and we have actually a little bit of a visual that we'll tee up later for this, but it's that listen. So if we come back to the website, hey, let's deploy this little thing that can help look at all the visitors and look at the paths they're taking so that you can get a data-driven approach to say, well, half of them browsed around these 3 sites, obviously didn't find what they're looking for, and click the contact us. And there you have your 250,000 calls a month that you have to handle, right? Plus more. So that's almost a way for us to start understanding what is their journey? Where are they coming from? What are they looking for? And that's almost step number 1. But to your point, Tony, of, that feeding up to each other. Well, great. Having that information then tells you where to start. What channels do you start on? What technology do you put in? And then that technology, as it's working with constituents in the public, is almost self-building its own knowledge, its own brain. These things leg up to each other. It's not a big bang approach. It's what is most effective and start building that foundation up from there, right? Steve, any thoughts on that?
And you both said the magic word multiple times. That's data, right? What do you do with this data? How do you collect it? How do you make it available to you? Knowledge management as a practice is new to the federal space, even to the enterprise space, and something that we have the tools to help you with from either pre-sales and discovery or from the actual implementation of technology. We can help you get a hold of that data and understand how to look at it both tactically and strategically. So you get real-time analytics as part of this, right? So we're always, when you get to your graphic, and maybe it might be time for that, we're going to talk about the learning phase as well, right? And it's real time. You're starting to create that whether it's a knowledge base or an FAQ database, or just learning about the caller's attitudes and the approach, and where I need to change what I'm focusing on, more on the web page, more chat sessions. I'm continually hearing this message. I better come up with an FAQ for it. All that is enabled by the technology that's at your disposal today, whether it's AI and learning on and adaptive intelligence, or if it's just speech analytics raw, right? You get both, and then just what to do to data, how to gather it, how to collate it, how to present it. That presentation of the data is just as critical as gathering it, right? So you can do all you want with it, manipulate it, create all the cool reports there are, but if you don't have a way to look at it in real time, and adjust to it, still not going to add any value for you. So that's probably one of the coolest things I think about what we do, which is getting that data useful in real time. So you're always improving and you're always learning, and it's always available. And I think that's just one of the better parts of the outcome.
Yeah, and I think, well, another point there is you mentioned enablement, and that carries all the way through, right? So this is where in a time that, employee retention and in employee training, things like that take a lot of time, and they're probably at a near low. It's the enablement and understanding of that data, now taking that and enabling the folks that are actually at a certain point in time, the one that's going to care for that customer, right? And ensuring that they have the proper data and the associated data and the understanding journey of that customer from the point that they've received that call or that interaction with them, that they know what to do for the next step, right? That they're comfortable, they're in an environment that they know where that data is going to reside, and it helps out for the overall employee experience as well, based upon that data and enablement.
Let's maybe talk about that, because by that I mean employee experience. We touched on it a couple of times. Steve, you mentioned it. Tony, you just mentioned it.
Yep.
That to me, and you guys share your opinions, but that to me is often an overlooked area of this transformation, right? CX, and this is not just public sector, this is every organization. I've had the privilege of working with some of the largest commercial organizations, and you talk CX and immediately it goes, all right, here's our 5 categories of personas of customers and all that. What about your people, right? I mean, at the end of the day, your people are what drive your organization, what drive the operational things to exceed in your mission. So on that, I think, a couple things come to mind, which is first, just the simple fact that I think, Steve, you mentioned earlier, but part of customer experience is employee experience and employee engagement, whatever term you want to use, right? I mean, that's a broad umbrella. But if we are not taking the same technologies that we are deploying externally to an organization and turning that around and deploying internally, you're still going to struggle. Because if your people are using antiquated things and not able to get the information and the data and access to the data and making sense of the data, Stephen mentioned, that's going to be very hard to serve the public and serve the customers effectively, right? So while we talk about external and CX, or a lot of the focus is that, we also have to talk about internal employees, and I think we'll touch on that in our little visual as well. But I mean, Steve, yeah, I think this is a huge topic, but what would you add to that employee side?
Well, I mean, it goes back to that qualitative experience we were both talking about earlier, right? Which is just, Tony mentioned retention, right? I mean, training and retention, that's not only cumbersome and expensive, but it is just a challenge across the board, whether commercial, federal, right? To talk about the white tsunami and people aging out, and you talk about all these other trends. But honestly, just plain having an agent or an employee experience that is positive just changes the entire game, right? If my job is easier and more pleasant, I'm going to be more pleasant with the customer. It's just human nature. I can put on that brave face no matter what kind of a day I'm having. But if I'm already happy, I'm happy, right? And if my job is easier because I have the tools and knowledge at my disposal to do my job well, because I have not run into someone yet in the federal agency that's working customer service that does not want to do their job well. They enjoy serving the public. That's why they're in these roles. They can do almost anything in the federal government. This is what they're doing, and they want to do it better. And when they're happy to do that, and they're happy as they're doing it, there's your answer to happier customers. And I think focusing on, and then you also mentioned using this technology internally. Everybody focuses on the customer side, but I guarantee you, your company or your agency has an internal contact center that your employees are calling. Focus on that. It's not only a chance to just do a proof of concept on the technology, but improve the experience for your own customers, your own employees, and you are your own customer. Many federal agencies, you're all serving citizens. You're citizens. So it's the holistic view you keep talking about, right? Which is outside in, inside out. You got to look at both sides, and then we'll help you figure out where to start.
Yeah. One thing, just a little bit of a side note too on that whole employee thing. I mean, some of the agencies that we work with, it's interesting. This is not what I'm about to say is not obviously their central goal, but it's a big value add, which is they're very proud of the fact that they get to offer market leading technologies, because then their people are learning that, right? And saying,
Yep.
Look, it's to your point, Steve, it's sometimes a very thankless job to be in public sector, as I'm sure everybody listening to the webinar can agree with. And I think, how do we start to help, in effect, almost the recruitment and the retention and all of that, which is, well, amongst many things, there are hundreds of aspects, but one of them is if you have the ability to use modern and leading tools, that makes a huge difference, because that person is also learning in that side. If they decide to depart public sector and go somewhere else, they have the job skills for it, all of that. That it's not a central component, but it's definitely one that's important. And we tend to, I think, we tend to sometimes lose sight of that, because it's all about how do we keep people within the agency. Well, it's great to keep them there by offering them the ability to learn and to expand their horizons, right? That's what makes them happy too in the end. So,
and that's why it's fun to be here. I mean, GTS's partner understands this more than anybody because they're implementing our technology with the customer. But we do bring to the public sector the exact same portfolio we bring commercially, and that is not everybody can say that. And that's probably the coolest thing about what we do, which is there's nothing that's available to Citicorp or any other corporation technology-wise that we can't bring to the table from a contact center customer experience perspective. And some federal agencies, you'd be surprised to know which ones, like look at Postal. U.S. Postal is bleeding edge of technology. Nobody knows this because they're shipping mail in the mailbox. But what they do on the back end, it's incredible. But this advanced technology, it's there for the federal government today. You're not 10 years behind or 5 years behind like you've always felt like you were. And that's really exciting to be able to serve that today, especially with our new expanded portfolio. So,
yeah, no, absolutely. So, looking at time real quick, one of the things, and we'll talk about after Tony talks about some of the change aspects, is I do want to actually talk about almost the servitization aspect. We see it a lot in commercial. It's starting to come into public sector. But before we broach that, let me share my screen again, and we'll use a couple of visuals here to maybe give a bit of a flavor for some of the things that we touched on. And for me, I kind of consider this a high level, let's call it articulation of this framework that we have. And I think you heard, Steve mention earlier at Genesis, we have a very strong focus on empathy. That to us drives a lot of things externally, internally, operationally, quantitatively, qualitatively. How do we start to build empathy in every system, function, go to market, contact, engagement, interaction that we have? One of the things though, and the reason I start here is, this is not a bad thing, but most organizations in every industry start from what we would call a system of action, right? That's kind of the, you think 5, 10, 15 years ago, let's get these systems into place. We need help. We need digitization. So that was, phones and IVR and chatbots and everything. Those are great. As we talked about though, while you can have successes there, they can also lead to spectacular failures. And we may all personally know of organizations that have gone through that, again, in every industry. And so what we actually start to talk about is, okay, and this goes back to the very first point that we made, which is we can do, but before we do, we should listen and we should learn and we should understand and we should predict, because that makes the doing so much more effective, right? So this is kind of our framework of, we have systems of listening. Again, how do we start to plug in data, points, all these different things and signals that allow us to start building a picture of whatever it is, a person, a process, an action, etc. Systems of understanding, pulling that data together and saying, how do we start to understand what they're trying to do and make a prediction? So coming back to my website example, right? This is what we mean by, hey, we have the ability to listen to even, tactically clicks on a website to say, they're very likely about to do this or about to do that. And armed with that, then our systems of action can go do it in a proactive, personalized manner. And finally, of course, as Steve and Tony both mentioned, these systems of learning. This is a virtuous cycle, right? Every single thing that we learn, every single thing that we build feeds back into this. But we start from here instead of jumping straight into systems of action because it's critical. And this is just another articulation of that. We have to understand, who are they? Where have they been? What have they done? Where have they come from? How are they feeling? What do they need? All these qualitative questions allow us to provide better service, right? These are backed by technologies, but these are also approaches that we take. Again, the super high level message I would have everyone take away is, it's okay to start maybe with the systems of action here, but you get much more impact both internally and externally if you start to look at this holistically, right? Now, one of the other things is then there's almost a lot of the internal things, and we call these the systems of success. How the business operates, how your organization operates, the technology you use, but also the change in the value. And change, I think, is both, I would say at the same time, always talked about, but sometimes overlooked at the same time, right? People, I feel like, assume they know what change is. Change means that we change our processes because we're implementing new technology. That's one aspect of change, but there's many more. So I think, Tony, there's a few visuals that we have here, but I'll turn it over to you if you want to chat about some of the change. I mean, you guys at GTS do change all day, every day, right? For many organizations. So.
That's right. That's right. So yeah, thanks, Tom. And with that, it's understanding that the technologies in flight are in play, but the most important part of that is the people aspect of things. And what is that change, and how is that change going to impact those folks, right? So, change, right, is how we mobilize our people and deliver expected results, right? In that specific time of change, right? So it's enabling our people to be successful on the change journey, right? And that we're essentially going to put them on by bringing in potentially this new technology. And like you were mentioning, Tom, this holistic view, right? So when we do these things and we look at the change aspect of these, when we look at it and we do it well, we find the most success in acceptance, and we realize those benefits much sooner, right? So, and just a note to that, Tom, right? So there's two sides of this that we typically see, and there's the technical side as well as the people side. And if we look at this from a change perspective, we have our current environment, we have our transition environment, right? And then we have our future state. But typically on the technical side, this is where we deal with the design and the development and the delivery of that said technology or that solution. But from the people side, what we're really looking to do is we look for them to embrace, right? We look for them to adopt, and also being able to use or have the usage of that solution within their own environment, right? So this is the key aspect of it. So next slide, if you would, please. So realizing that technology does move faster than people, right? It's the technology changes from our perspective when we're working with clients. We find that the technology changes are far simpler than the people change, right? So this is where, as GTS and help with our friends here at Genesis, we pause and ask, right? Are people aligned with the technology changes? So the main purpose, and this is ideally the main focus for the change management journey. So at GTS, we bridge the technology and the people gap, right? To support those business goals and improve prediction, right? Number one, the customer, and then probably more importantly, the employees, right? So, this is where what we've found is we're converging and we have an overlap from that perspective when we're looking at the change management piece. It's really, at the end of the day, what we found up in follow-up conversations based on our deployments, it's really helping agencies attract and retain employees, right? With a higher enablement ability, as well as retainment and ultimately employee satisfaction. So how do we go about looking at this? So you might be thinking, and if you would roll to the next slide, please. How does something like this occur, right? What does a change journey look like? And it begins with these five topics, right? And we begin to understand why. Because people are asking, how is this going to impact me? Because they care about what's going to happen to them. Is this going to be a positive change or a negative change from my perspective? When I come in each day, how is that going how is that going to burden me, or how is that going to improve me personally and professionally each day? So we begin to understand why. We want them to understand why, what their personal decisions are within this change, right? We want them to understand or know how to be able to address these changes and what requires action for a positive outcome. And then the ability to be able to close loop this thing with reinforcement to sustain this model, right? And this is done typically, and if you would hit the next slide, please, Tom. And this is done, and we've adopted it, and people that are familiar with the change management process understand ProSci and their ADKAR model, right? And we effectively bring this into our project management, I guess we call it our model, but our project management methodology includes a change management scope, right? Where specifically is GTS, and if you would hit enter one more time, Tom, that GTS, what we're providing within our methodology is we're providing the knowledge and the how to invoke that change. We're providing that information, the end state of what these things are going to look like, the enablement of those. And this ADKAR, being the awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement, is the foundation in which we use, right? So it's a co-share and it's a co-model between us and that organization we're working with. But as GTS, we drive within our program and understanding, and we want to drive an awareness of internally and help that organization identify what that need is for change, right? The desire. Is there a desire to be able to do that internally again, right? We're bringing in the technology, but what's the desire amongst the group of people that are going to be consuming these, right? We work with them to provide that knowledge, right? And ensure that you're trained properly and have that enablement and ready to go day one, as well as tune these systems over a period of time, right? So the opportunity to be able to partner with an organization over a period of time and not just during the implementation process, right? And then again, we round this off by looking at the reinforcement. How can we make this sustainable, right? And back to that piece, whether it's, any of the modifications to the system, because the systems that are in place now make it a lot easier to deploy new types of features and functionalities within days or weeks and not necessarily months. So whenever another change occurs, it's a micro change, and we're able to bring that into that closed loop feedback and as well work with the customer to be able to identify how that reinforcement is happening and when, right? So again, what we found is through this model, Tom, and everyone on the call, that we've really been able to, improve the employee morale, right? And those are, and how we're able to do that and deliver that is through it's the inherent solutions within inside of a modern contact center solution, right? Allowing them to focus on the specific things that are needed. We enable them at a specific point in time. We reduce that manual effort, right, from that repetitive working task. And then ultimately, again, improve the attraction and retention of employees over a period of time. So the real key to this is coupling the technology with the people aspect of it, pulling those together and producing a solid solution that ultimately benefits constituents as well as employees.
Oh, it's fantastic. So, Tony, one thing for me now, out of that whole model, of course, every piece is important, but for me, I think the reinforcement one bears talking about. And what I often see organizations struggle with is the mindset of, and this again is all industries, right? But the mindset of you do a project, and then at the end of the project, shiny rainbow, we're done. We go back to the way it was, and our CSAT has gone up 10 points. That's not going to happen, right? Changing, and if we talk about good customer experience, which can be defined any number of ways, but that is fundamentally an organizational mindset shift of delivering good customer experience, focusing on that. We cannot expect to say, I will spend X dollars, do this in 9 months, and then spit this out and then be done with it, right? I mean, to your point there, Tony, around reinforcement, if I take let's get tactical again, we talk about digital technologies. There are many organizations in the world who have deployed chatbots as an example, right? We, as consumers, personally have probably interacted with them. Some of them are okay. Many of them are not okay. the hallmarks of where many of them are not okay comes down to in the thousands that I've looked at and in the organizations we work with, which is they do not reinforce. They do not have that change built into the organization. They deployed a chatbot, said, here, it can answer 100 questions, and then left it for 2 years. What do you think is going to happen? That is a stale piece of technology that doesn't serve anybody. And so the point is, when we talk about change, it's the fact that you have to realize, hey, taking this technology means that you now have a new process. You have a process where you go in and look at the analytics every week or every 2 weeks and then go make adjustments. Now, maybe some people immediately think, that's a lot of overhead. What's the benefit? Well, what's the benefit when you're running, like a lot of our customers do, 90+% self-service resolution rates with fantastic CSAT scores, meaning their customers, 90+% of their customers are able to get their answer very quickly in a self-service scenario. And their people are able to take on things that people should be taking on, which is complexity and expertise and all of that, right? That is the benefit. But it cannot be I deploy this and I expect magic and I never have to touch it again. No, this is a change. This is ongoing. And chatbots are just a very simple example. This extends to all technologies, right? But I mean, Steve, again, all very large topics we're talking about here, but yeah, any thoughts from you on that?
Well, the chatbot thing's fun, because it's something almost everybody's seen, but there's a lot of things you can do with it. First of all, the perception is that it's going to displace bodies and people, and that is not the case. It's going to allow the people, like you said, to focus on the things they need to focus on, the more complex tasks, right? And that makes the agents happier too, because they're not doing password resets or for the 147th time giving someone their balance, right? And that's
repurposed, definitely.
Getting status, right? Just status. Where's my passport? Those kind of things are important, and having that interactive, being able to cut down. But also, when does that chatbot appear? If you can make that, instead of someone pops on the website, you get as soon as you get to somewhere, boom, hi, can I help you? No, I'm good, right? But if you see someone struggling to do something, they move between a couple, we could have some heuristics or some targets, some triggers that say they try to do this a few times or they've moved away from here to there. Hey, I see you're having some trouble. May I help you? Would you like a call? And then you can maybe offer them a call, right? So it's how you present that chatbot as well. So again, it's that learning, right, Tom? So it's not just, I'm going to deploy chatbots and I don't have to reset passwords anymore. Yay. But it's so much more, right? It's how am I going to apply that technology to make everybody's experience better? And something as simple as chatbots becomes a very advanced topic, right? And it doesn't have to be advanced in deployment, but it's the application, right? And when do you do it? How do you inject it? You're not taking people, you're not killing people's jobs, you're not displacing them. You're making the experience better across the board. And then just flipping it on it's really kind of annoying. So we're going to help make sure that you do it in a proactive way and make sure that's a good experience. All that's where we're telling you guys come in, right? Which is
right.
Consulting side of the technology also, which is we can do this, but you might want to consider something else. And that's why we're excited to have you as a partner. So.
And, on that note, maybe I'll paint a little bit of picture as well for folks who may be new to the digital space and trying to learn about some of the industry averages and such. Let's take chatbot again. Sorry, not that we pick on chatbots, right? But it happens to be a good scenario here. What's the industry standard for a generic chatbot that sits on a website and the number of people that click to engage? 3 to 4%. That is abysmally low. So when we talk about, okay, let's say you spend millions of dollars, which it should not cost, but millions of dollars in deploying this chatbot that only 3 to 4% of people click on, what is the point, right? And that is because oftentimes it's, again, a focus on that system of action. Hey, I have this chatbot to do an action and I just put that in. Steve, what the scenario you mentioned is, well, if we understand their context, and this is the systems of learning and systems of understanding and prediction, if we can know, and we can do that from our technology, right? Where do they click? What are they trying to do? And pop up a proactive shaped offer, if you will. Hey, Steve, it looks like you're struggling with this. Maybe they don't know who you are, but hey, it looks like you're struggling with this. Do you need help? That 3 to 4% can go up to 30 to 40%. Absolutely. That is a 10-fold increase in effectiveness. And our point is that, even when you talk about good technology, it fundamentally makes a difference of how you approach it, where 100%. You put it, right? What you arm it with. A chatbot is not a chatbot is not a chatbot. They're all, or you can also say chatbot is a chatbot is a chat. Underneath the covers, the technology may be the same, but the way of deploying it can give you vastly different results. And I think that's one of the things that we keep coming back to is if you only deploy technology for the sake of technology and having it there, not going to be effective. Save your money, right? Stick to paper. But how you approach, how you do it differently is definitely, you know, one of those things. Tony,
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And those are typically the conversations where we start with and finding those specific use cases, right? So in that initial in those initial discoveries, those are the conversations that we're going to have about what data is available today, right? What are the top items that typically that we see trending right now? Why people are contacting the organization, right? So, and then have an understanding too of there's these pandemics that happen these days, but to be aware and be ready to be able to shift that technology and understand the consumption of that and how they do that and change what's included within inside that solution, right? Change the content to adapt for that specific need at that specific point in time. So that reinforcement comes back into play. But typically we're looking at it we look at it to be to start offloading some of the monotonous work or the typical items that are dealt with every day and identify whom's contacting your organization and why, the data available, and then we look to offset that, right? And then again, from that perspective, like you were mentioning from an employee standpoint, Steve, it's now being able to take those folks and utilize them in other areas for a higher, higher touch customer experience interaction where they do need to speak to an agent and they're prepared for that as well, not these monotonous items. So our entry point is those fairly repetitive tasks, and then we get into the more complex type of items like you were mentioning, Tom, with the artificial intelligence now being able to use that and see what people are saying or how they're interacting, and now we can start to fold in more of the complex type of items, right? To where once we get a foundational element based upon that data and that experience, it doesn't get to be so complicated. Now we're starting to tune in those things and now completing a lot more self-service where available, from where somebody wants to self-serve, is the accuracy to be able to complete that interaction with that constituent, getting the data they need at that point in time becomes paramount, right? So we start slow and then we start working into more complexities as the organization has the ability to do so based upon our consulting efforts as well.
100%, and then on top of that, if you want to layer in, you go back to learning, right? So now you have this data, you've implemented. Let's go back to chatbots one more time. You've implemented it. It's serving its purpose now. You're increasing answer time. You're making sure people get there. But you also have to analyze: are these people asking the same questions the same every time, or is it always the same spot at the webpage? Hey, you know what? Maybe I need to look at the webpage. I fixed it. Wait, okay, great. So now I'm answering. I've augmented it. Maybe I just need to redesign the webpage. That data, how you holistically look at what you're collecting, it goes beyond just serving, right? It's leveraging what you learn and sometimes in real time and saying, look, we have an actual problem here. It's not great. I've solved it in the interim and my chatbot's addressing it, but it can also do other things. Let's fix the website so they can get what they need there and go where they need to go and move on, right? So much data available, so much, so many views and what you can capture and how to analyze it and how to act on it. And that's where the AI and the advanced technology comes in because it helps that learning process for you. So it's a journey. It's absolutely a journey. And it starts just with that whole listening and asking the right questions. And it's cool to have the portfolio at your disposal to leverage all of those, but you also have the folks to understand the practice.
One thing that comes up, and I think we'll pause for questions. So folks, please feel free to put any questions in the Q&A, and we'll come to those in a couple minutes here. Steve, as you were talking about, the systems of learning again here, one of the things for me and the topic that I mentioned earlier, which is almost this notion of, we call it, I think it's a made up word, but servitization in the industry, right? Which is, I swear I've looked that up and it's used, but it's not an official word. So who knows where it came from? But in commercial organizations, that's the notion of going from selling a singular product one time or, whatever ad hoc, to a service model, to a subscription model, right? So just like, even for cars, which odd as it sounds, I don't know if everybody's seen, but you can go from, and it's not a lease, right? But you can go from buying a car to basically subscribing to a car, and you can change the car out every month.
All day long.
Yeah, all day. And so now, why am I saying that? Because even in public sector, we're seeing a lot of the same shifts where it depends on the services. But again, especially in HHS, especially in JPS, a lot of these high touch, let's call it emotion, high need to focus areas. It's gone from, maybe we can leave our customer experience the way it is because people only deal with us, once every year for benefits or things like that. Well, not really, right? If you look at the stats, people are going to these organizations on a weekly, monthly basis. You can no longer say it's okay to have a bad experience and they can spend 4 hours, once a year figuring it out. Well, they're spending 4 hours every month, 4 hours every week sometimes figuring this out. And so again, not to pick on anything in particular, but it's just that same mindset has to go through, to your point, Steve. When we start gleaning the data, it changes everything. Again, you deploying a chatbot is a widget, but that information, that data has to cascade through the rest of your website, your organization, every chat, right? That must enrich and feed everything that you do as an agency, because that's very useful signals on what people need, what people are asking for. And I think oftentimes, while we focus on digital for technology, part of what digital does is it's finally a way to give us real-time data in manageable ways that is digital from the get-go. We don't have to, oftentimes organizations that run legacy phone systems, for example, may not have any data because they didn't provide any data, right? Those phone systems aren't digital by nature. And so that's a challenge of how do I get data from something that doesn't generate data? Well, that's where digital natively helps, because it generates data in a meaningful way that you can now use across the rest of the organization. So it's, look, there's a lot to unpack, but I think this is where, as long as we start to think about it from the right approach, we can save a lot of time, energy, and money, right, from organizations here. So if we kind of take a pause there and look at some of the questions, I think one question is, and this is a maybe a loaded one, but how do I get started without reinventing and ripping out everything that I have today? I mean, I think it's a really legitimate question, right? And again, this spans all industries, but is very impactful for public sector. And I'll take a quick start, and Steve and Tony, please feel real free to jump in. For me, I think I'm always a fan of, and we kind of touched on this earlier, but I'm always a fan of looking at what is the most impactful, small incremental changes sometimes that we can make to, again, have a big impact, right? Let me get specific. So what is something that most agencies have? A phone system, let's just say, right? All right, phone system where you have a number, somebody can call in. Most phone systems, if they operate this way, usually go by skills-based kind of routing, right? And as in, let's say there's an IVR, somebody hits 1, 2, 3. Maybe if it's more advanced, there's a bot on there. If the bot can't respond, at least it's taken some information. All that is fed into skills-based matching to say, hey, you've got, let's say, 3 agents, Steve, Tom, and Tony, right? Steve and Tom know, I don't know, benefits management. Tom and Tony know something else, and then Tony and Steve know, right? These permutations, again, for folks who are not familiar with the space, that's generally how it works. That's okay. And so you could say, great, this thing comes in and matches the skills, but that's more still of a quantitative approach, because what is having a skill tell you? Now, you could even rate skills. Steve's a 3, Tom's a 1, Tony's a 2, but even there, that's subjective, right? And so I bring that example up because that's to me, a very slight change in an existing system we can do, where instead of looking at skills, we look at more qualitative things like the outcome. And we say, hey, out of your maybe 1,000 agents, right? Instead of purely looking at skills, we look at skills and availability and all that standard stuff, but we also look at who has the lowest predicted handle time, who has the highest predicted first call resolution. These qualitative measures that AI can now start to look at. That is a fundamental shift that makes a lot of impact, but is a very minor change. It's a very minor change because it may be the same, it's still a phone system, still using the same IVR and whatnot, but we're injecting, in this case, what we call predictive routing, right? Not to get tactical here, but that to me is an example, and there's thousands of it, where again, that question comes back as, I can't, and I don't want to, and I can't afford to rip everything. Well, you don't have to, right? We can make minor changes that have outsized impacts that allow you to benefit your customers and yourself from very early on. Steve, Tony, anything you would add to there? Again, so
that along
these are all hour-long conversations in themselves.
Yeah, a lot of passion there. I think a lot of that in a phased approach, right? It's being able to take some of those inherent concepts and that are available in modern digital solutions and phase that over a period of time, right? So now you are being able to manage that. So the management, the design, the deployment, the change management process of those things Now you're taking bite sizes. You're not necessarily having to eat an elephant and try to hit it by a specific date. More so taking feedback and bringing that loop back in for the next potential phase to bring on that next piece of technology based upon the data and how that's being consumed currently. So along with the technology, it's the deployment aspects of it as well, right? And we're in the business of people. You know, people take vacations. It's summertime now. Quite a few folks are out. So what's the availability of folks? But it's now being able to bring this in a predictable manner rather than just, you know, an unorganized type of dump, as well as a data dump on an organization. So,
well, you know, and you know, just to sort of take a different tack, you know, to me also, where do you start? It's also how do you start, right? Discovery. I have this process I've always used: discover, design, order, stage, cut, in that order for technology information.
Yep.
I like to skip discovery. They order some cool stuff, then they find out what they need, they redesign it, then they order more stuff. So, but how do you do discovery? Discovery is sort of like an art and a science altogether, right? But the most important thing is identify your stakeholders and bring them to the table. Get everybody in the party, right? So if you want to know where to start, make sure you have someone from every group, the agents, the technology people that support them, the managers. Make sure you have an actual group. Do some good old-fashioned brainstorming. What do you wish would happen? What do you wish your system would do and could do? And it could start with something simple like, gosh, every time the phone rang, I wish it would make a cup of coffee. Believe it or not, I can make that happen. But the point is, it gets people start thinking about what do I want to happen? Because this transformation we talk about, you know, I like this. Business requirements beget functional requirements, and functional requirements beget technical requirements. And a lot of agencies have a habit of starting with, here's how I do it. I want to upgrade it. I want to move it to the cloud as it is, lift and shift. They're not transforming, right? And so if you start with the business requirements, what am I trying to do? Because some of the reasons you're doing some of these things is that was the only way you could do it with the system you had at your disposal. Now, you look at business requirements, come up with your functional requirements, say, okay, my system is doing these things, but I could add this and maybe do this a little bit better and change it. And that's that tweak. So you're not you're not ripping out the whole thing, but you're just changing the game by implementing something simple. Perhaps like maybe change your IVR to, you know, or VRU, which responds to an IVR, so it's grabbing some data, or where you're putting the data and analyzing it. So many changes you can do incrementally, but if you start the journey of discovery of, you know, business, functional, then technical, rather than starting with, here's my technical requirements, here's what I have, make it better. You're missing something there, and I think it's an art. And I think that if you start with the business functions, the rest will get itself out.
Oh, fantastic.
Very good points.
With there's a few minutes left. I'm trying to see which questions won't be a 20-minute, you know, answer, which is great, but we can definitely tackle those next. I think maybe as we kind of end here, one of the questions to address is, how should let's come back even tactically to the White House executive order, and especially at the federal level, at least the TMF fund, right, with $100 million earmarked for customer experience. That has, for those who are not familiar, I think, Steve, start of August is the deadline, right? It's right around
August 1st. Yep.
And so I think for organizations that are on the phone, and even if you're not federal, and even if this is after you're hearing this after that, you know, deadline has passed, there's still other opportunities to go, you know, get funding and grants and things like that. I think the question is, where do people start? How do they even start to make that case for getting that funding, right? So Steve, I don't know if you want to jump in on that to kind of tee you off, but I think the spirit of the question is, how do they get started? What do they do? You know, where do they even start thinking about, you know, rationalizing this? So,
well, I mean, speaking to GSA and the Modernization Fund the folks are doing evaluation and looking at it. They're looking for innovation, and they're looking for a complete analysis of what they were doing. They have $100 million, a lot of money, but it's not for the entire federal government, right? So that's these little jurisprudences to give it out. If you're going to come to them and looking for some fun, have a plan. And one of the things she pointed out as well, the GSA, was bring the stakeholders to the table. Make sure you've addressed everybody's needs and requirements. Don't come at me with just, you know, what you think the coolest toys are and why you think you need them. Tell me and show me that you have spoken to your organization, that you have a plan, and then you have a real genuine need for transformation. And that's what's, you know, it's not necessarily complexity, it's outcomes based, but it's also making sure that you're doing your homework before you get there. But there's money to be had, guys, and you talk about small changes that can make a huge difference. So by all means, please, don't hesitate to take a look at that fund. It's there now, and you have all the excuse you need from that presidential mandate. And this is specifically aimed at that, right? And there's use cases out there today. They describe these life experiences now that you're supposed to address. And if you read the presidential mandate, they've talked about something like transitioning out of the military, the birth experience, right? unemployment, getting a passport renewed. They've identified these life experiences as use cases that everyone's focusing on, but you can derive from those use cases maybe what your agency needs specifically or can do, and say, yeah, I can transform, I can take advantage of that. So, if you haven't read that thing front to back, believe it or not, every sentence of that thing has got some information. That mandate is not just go do it, go fix it. There's some very specific, requirements in there for each agency, and then also some suggestions and recommendations. So,
yeah, I think, and for me, reading through the criteria for the selection, for example, that TMF put out, right? I think what it speaks to me is similar to what we talked about, which is, again, this is just my personal opinion. So the TMF folks can probably tell each of you agencies better, but I read that as, to your point, Steve, yes, this is a process to get a portion of this money, but the criteria is also set up to start helping everyone think that way. Technologies that are sustainable, technologies that can be applied to multiple agencies, technologies that really make an impact and that aren't kind of just, here's $10 million, goodbye. No, $10 million, I want to see the impact. I want to see milestones. I want to see effects. I want to see effectiveness, right? And I think that's good for public sector in the long run, especially in the United States, because it helps transform fundamentally the way of thinking. Again, it's not I do X and get Y. It's no, I transform and I focus on customer experience for the long run, for the next 500 years of my agency, whatever that is, right? So,
and one of the examples they gave, honestly, the funds that were awarded $2 million to help take forms on the webpage go from 22 pages to 2. Now, you're talking about it's lifetime changing experience, right? Because they're talking about this time tax. One thing that the customer experience mandate talks about is the time tax. How can you change that? And there's little changes in technology, something as simple as callback, virtual queue, and calling back. The IRS saved over 800 million minutes of wait time last year. That's an outrageous amount of minutes, right? That's also savings for the federal government. Toll-free is toll-free for the user, not the agency, right? So all these things, the impact you can have with little changes, that wasn't an entire phone system change. That was implementing a piece of something, right? It's out there. The transformation is there, and there's help out there to help you decide what might have the biggest impact, and certainly how you can approach it. So anything facing the customer right now is viable, and it's a great opportunity to be in the space and to take advantage of these mandates.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, look, we're coming up on time. We've got a couple minutes left, so want to be respectful of that. We'll end it there. Thank you everyone for attending. Looking forward to chatting with you. If you want to reach out directly, feel free to contact us. You can go to the website that we have for government, or here's our direct emails, right? Tony, Steve, and myself. Feel free to reach out to any of us. We'd love to have a conversation, and even to help, for example, go get some of those TMF funds, for example, or work on other things as well. So with that, I think we can stop it there. Tony, Steve, it was fantastic to chat with you guys.
Yeah,
and
pleasure. Thanks
again.
Yeah, sounds great. Appreciate everybody's time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
All right.